Well, I'm very glad to be with you this morning. Happy to see some faces that are now familiar because of the workshop that we shared together yesterday as well. And when I say that I am glad to be with you this morning, it's partly, of course, because I really enjoy unpacking with people a little bit about that intersection between our spiritual commitments and motivations and what brings us to work for justice in the world. But today I'm also glad to be with you because I live in Boston. And I don't know how much you follow weather that doesn't affect you, but I was home when the blizzard came in early in the week, and my poor husband, when I texted him a beautiful picture of the sunrise yesterday morning, he texted me back and said, 14 more inches coming in. So I'm really happy to be here with you today. Barb mentioned in his introduction of me that I served as a parish minister for 25 years before stepping into the role I now hold with our denomination. 21 of those years I spent serving a single congregation in New Haven, Connecticut. In all of those years of parish ministry, one of the things that I came to realize is that across all our differences in our congregations around the continent, although we have many differences, we tend to revisit again and again a small menu of central themes when we gather together on Sunday morning. The sermon, of course, changes week to week. The wonderful music changes. But nevertheless, if you really look at the things around which we gather in worship, there is a small handful of large questions we visit. And these are questions of meaning. What am I called to in my life? How do I live my life more congruently with my values? What is the great meaning to which I can contribute outside of my small life? And so on. We revisit these questions again and again together, not because we are fond of repetition, and not because we are slow learners, and not even because they're really big questions, although surely they are that. We come back to these questions again and again because the answers that we are able to receive to them are always ephemeral. We never get a solid roadmap helping us to march forward. Instead, it's a little bit more like we're walking along a path in a dense fog. So we take a couple of steps, and then we have to stop and look and ask again. This is not how we are used to thinking about progress in our lives. We tend to think of progress as this very linear thing. You take Spanish 101 and then you graduate to Spanish 102. We think of things as being very linear, one step following the next. But if we look at the large arenas of our lives, that's actually hardly ever true. Arenas like spiritual growth, becoming more mature or wise in our lives. And the reason it's not true is because these are kind of spiral paths. We have to come back again and again to central questions that guide us in the hope that we're viewing them from a somewhat different place. But we have to continually come back to them because the answers we receive are ephemeral. I've come to believe that the work of justice in our lives is also one of these arenas. It isn't, of course, quite the same, not even as ephemeral as the work of spiritual maturity, for instance, in our lives. But even in the work of social justice, where we try to make some very specific, concrete things happen, like raise the minimum wage or push our government toward climate accords, even there, the work that we do turns out to have a spiral path, not a linear one. We have to come back to the same issues and the same questions again and again. That is because the work of shifting our world more toward justice is not ever a matter of a particular issue or a particular campaign. It has to do instead, not so much with what we do, but with how we and many, many thousands of people choose to live and how we become into our lives. In that sense, social change is never only about what we do. It is about who we are. It includes a kind of listening for who we are called to be in these fleeting lives of ours so that our lives can be lived with deep meaning. And to live in that way requires of us some of the classic virtues, like patience, courage, and what might be called steadfastness or perseverance. Some time ago, I read an essay by a woman named Chanthea Monroe, in which she recounted just a little snippet of conversation that she had with her children, who were just pre-adolescent, as they were coming home from having watched a movie together. The kids were in the back seat, and as she drove along, she realized they were arguing over which would be the coolest superpower to have. So they were balancing how cool it would be to be able to fly versus the idea of being able to be invisible, or whether it would be better to have sort of out-and-out magic like Harry Potter or to have ESP. And finally, one of them thought to call to her, to the front seat where she was driving, and said, "Okay, Mom, what do you think would be the coolest superpower?" And she thought about it for a minute, and then to her own surprise, she found herself answering, "Perseverance." And of course, her children hooted and said, "That's not a real superpower." And then they went back to ignoring her. But she found herself pondering her own answer to that question, and she realized the reason that had come out of her is because she recognized how often it's missing today in our age of instant gratification. And yet this core human virtue is essential to enacting any of the others in our lives, to living out of courage, for instance. Simple human power of perseverance. So how do we cultivate that human power? How do we cultivate it in our own lives and in our own efforts? It is, after all, a core religious value, just like those other virtues that we might more commonly name, like patience or courage. And therefore, it isn't something we feel, but rather something we enact. The great Jewish theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel once wrote, "The beginning of faith is not a feeling for the mystery of living or a sense of awe. The root of religion is the question what to do with these feelings. Religion begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us." Religion begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us. Not a new idea for Unitarian Universalists. We are, after all, the people who make our home along that long religious spectrum, and the place of that spectrum that is the most grounded in this world, in this one life. We are the descendants of religious ancestors who rejected the idea that a God of love could have a hell prepared for us or for any people after death. Instead, those ancestors of ours pointed to the hell that human beings create for one another right here on this earth. Their faith called them to respond to that very real and present hell. Our faith, the same faith, is calling to us still. At the heart of the Unitarian Universalism that we proclaim is that marvelous image of the interdependent web of existence, of which we are all a part. Anytime we visit or recite our purposes and principles together, the image of that web is there. And I think it's partly because it's so easy for us to picture. We all know what those beautiful orb spider webs look like, shining in a meadow on a summer morning. But this religious image of ours, this interdependent web at the heart of our faith, does not just link us to the beauty of our world, but also to its suffering and its pain. The interdependent web of ours connects us to the fear and despair of immigrants who are lost in detention this beautiful morning here in California. It ties us to people in the Philippines and in Bangladesh who are already experiencing the catastrophe of climate change. It ties us to the grotesque chasm between people who live in an excess of comfort and those who are trapped in rank poverty. When we elevate the virtue of perseverance, we remember the constancy of that religious web of connection and the truth that the tug of its strands demands something of us, as long as we're breathing the air of this sweet earth. It infuses us with an irresistible sense of mission, because it compels us to look up and away from the lucky place we stand and follow its strands out to all of the places where our sisters and brothers are imperiled. Our religion is not about a private feeling of happiness or well-being, even of reverence or of awe, but rather what we do with those feelings, how they lead us to turn our gaze toward a fractured world and put the weight of our lives on the side of its mending. The Unitarian Universalist College of Social Justice, which I now lead as director, was created to help us in that large imperative of our faith. Founded just 2.5 years ago jointly by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the college is an entirely new level of collaboration between those two large institutions of our faith. Its programs revolve around experiential learning, which is the idea that the most powerful kind of learning, the kind that can sometimes literally lead us to change our lives, comes to us not from books or films or lectures or sermons, but rather through a face-to-face encounter with some dimension of our reality that has been invisible to us. So we bring groups of people on short-term journeys, which are really pilgrimages of witness and solidarity, linking us to people on the front lines of justice struggles, both within the United States and as far afield as India and Haiti. Along with these short journeys to Mexico, India, Haiti, and a variety of locations within the United States, we offer week and 2-week-long intensive justice trainings for high school youth to help them manifest our faith through choices of action that they are already capable of. We are actually piloting a brand new one this coming summer in Tucson, Arizona, that will bring our youth into the paths followed by the migrants crossing that dangerous desert in order to help leave water that will save lives along those trails. We arrange summer-long internships for college-age young adults in justice organizations here in the U.S. and in places as far afield as Ghana and India, catching these young adults right on the cusp of decision-making about vocation in the hope that they can imagine their own vocation in the work of justice-making. All of these programs of the College of Social Justice, and any that we will create going forward, are grounded in 3 core convictions. The first is that in any kind of service learning journey or training, we should be aware that the true service we render does not come on the journey, but after we return home. All of our programs are designed to help us learn not only about the place and the people that we visit, but about our own position in the matrix of privilege and power, and how we can leverage the place we stand in ways that can bring more justice to our world. The second core conviction grounding the College of Social Justice is that our action in the world for justice should be connected to spiritual practice. Practices of contemplation, like prayer and meditation, ground us and center us and sustain us. They remind us to turn ourselves toward the immense mystery of life, whether or not we ever call that God. They let us drink from the deep wells that sustain us even through periods of despair and failure. They balance our spirits, and they help us to see our small efforts in a long arc of work that stretches back behind us centuries for those who have tried to make justice before us and will stretch on toward those who come after us. But spiritual practices are also essential for another reason. It's because they help engage us in a kind of deep looking that allows us to see our own shadows. Think for just a moment about that hymn that we sang together this morning, written almost 100 years ago, God of Grace and God of Glory. So often the hymns and songs that we sing together that are focused on social justice cast us in the role only of change maker. So for instance, one of my actual all-time favorites by Kathleen McTigue is a song in which we sing, "We'll build a land where we'll bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free." It's a beautiful song and it's inspirational. But listen to what a different feeling is evoked by those words that we sang together this morning. Cure thy children's warring madness. Bend our pride to thy control. Shame our wanton, selfish gladness, rich in things and poor in soul. Try not to trip over the theology and think not about what these words imply about God, but instead what they imply about us. Cure our madness, bend our pride, shame our selfishness, heal our wounds, and then grant us wisdom and courage. When our justice work is grounded in spirituality, it helps us remember that the things we can see so clearly that have to be changed out there in the world often have seeds within our own hearts. They help us remember we are not likely to end a war if we carry out there into the effort hearts filled with rage. We are not likely to reduce the chasm between wealth and poverty if we carry out there hearts filled with greed. Spiritual practices help us see our own shadows and become change makers not only of the world, but of ourselves. And the third core conviction grounding the College of Social Justice is that the interdependent web of our faith really contains the entire power and urgency of the mission to which we are all called. The truth our web proclaims is that we rise and fall together. All things that live, all things that breathe. And so we must awaken from our delusions of separateness and find all of the ways open to us each day of our lives to harness minds and hearts and hands to the common good. This faith of ours, in which we so often proclaim the goodness of diversity, calls us to this work, calls us to honor the many lines of difference without allowing those lines to become barriers and boundaries holding us back from other people. It is in this way that we become true allies to those who are the most vulnerable around us. It is in this way that we find the power of solidarity, and in this way that we train each gesture we make to be one of compassion, generosity, and justice, creating not just the world in which we hope to live, but also the human beings we hope to be. I believe we hope to be people whose faith speaks not only to us within walls like these and gatherings like this, but also to the wider world outside of us. I believe we want to be those who will live within ourselves the changes we dream of making in the world. Those willing to study our sometimes hostile hearts and water there the seeds of compassion. Those who, like Gandhi, will refuse to make our adversaries into enemies. And most fundamentally, I believe we want to be those who will be part of the world's healing. When we come to the end of these fleeting lives of ours, as Anne Lamott said in the reading, we want to know that our single lives, like a letter of the alphabet, have been part of shaping a great meaning. May it be so. Amen.